checks in month on month. Thank you, Mick. But I'm really excited to see a swag of new faces too coming on, so welcome. I'm really happy that this topic is resonating with people, and I thank you all for taking time out of your busy day today to join us live. Today's online chat is a collaborative effort, so I'd just like to acknowledge that WALN have really enjoyed working with Perth NRM and RegenWA, and thank you to them for reaching out to curate this learning opportunity for everyone. I'd also like to acknowledge the Carbon Positive team for their contribution. They've developed a fantastic checklist resource that will be provided to everyone via email after today's event, so thank you very much. I'm going to hand over. We are very lucky to be joined by WA Landcare's Chair, Mick Davis, in Newman, and he is going to do our acknowledgement of country and just acknowledge our funders today. Cheers, Mick.
Thanks very much, Casey. I would absolutely like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands upon which we live, work and play, and are dialing in from across Western Australia and possibly across the nation today. I'd also like to extend my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who may be in attendance today. It always was and it always will be Aboriginal land. So my name is Mick, and I am the chairperson of the Landcare Network. I'm also involved with two of our member groups, the Friends of Upper Lesmeady Falls and the Nature Reserves Preservation Group. And I'm joining us all today from the traditional lands of the Nobali people, and the Mardu people are the custodians of this land. So thank you very much, and I'll throw that back to you, Casey. Next steps.
Thanks, Mick. Just want to acknowledge our funders today as well. So State NRM and the National Landcare Network allow WA Landcare Network to work to deliver and design these learning events for our community. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and just introduce our guest speakers. We've got a lot to cover today, so I will not waste time with my chat. Each person will present for about 10 minutes, which is going to leave lots of time for Q&A, because I know there's lots of landholders on the call today that are going to want to have some questions answered, so we want to leave lots of time. First up, we're going to hear from the beautiful Louise Tarrier, CEO of Carbon Positive Australia, straight off the plane from the UK. So thank you so much for joining us. We're going to hear from Dr Geoff Woodall, native plant agronomist and reveg industry expert. What a mouthful there. And we will also chat with Zoe Johnson. She's a landholder in the southwest, who is also part of the Healthy Estuaries WA program, and she's going to share her on-ground knowledge on this subject. So I'm going to hand the floor over firstly to Louise. Thanks, Louise.
Firstly, unmute myself. Sorry, I'm just going to stop sharing and start again. For some reason, my screen didn't share properly.
That's okay.
There we go. That's better. Can everybody see the screen?
It's just, yep, perfect.
Cool. Well, I also want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners here in WA and across the whole of Australia, and for their care of the land for millennia. It's something that I really feel when I take trips out, particularly out into the Wheatbelt area here in WA, and just generally their care for the land. And so, yeah, acknowledging traditional owners and the elders, past, present, and of course emerging, very important. I want to talk kind of broadly. Obviously, I'm going to be talking about Carbon Positive Australia's work because that's what I know, but I wanted to try and keep it sort of broader as well. And so when we were asked to present here, we wanted to give some examples really of the types of projects that, we've been involved in, and also that, you can potentially do yourself or in collaboration with others. Obviously Carbon Positive Australia, but there are also other groups out there, of course, that help with these kind of projects as well. So I suppose for Carbon Positive Australia, why do we do this? Well, at heart, we're a climate organisation. But we're also interested in, the fact that particularly here in the Southwest region, the amount of biodiversity loss, and also, the health and well-being that comes from having revegetated land, not just for us, but for the creatures that we sort of share the planet with as well. So for us, those are the sort of three things that kind of coalesce into climate. And I found a very interesting stat, which was if we were to restore a significant proportion of the Australian wheat belt, and that would be roughly about 10%, with a tree density of 500 trees per hectare, we'd be looking to plant around 900 million trees. And I know for one fact, that cannot be done by one party. That has to be done by everybody working together. And we all know the really good reasons why we should be planting trees. Protecting rare species, increasing biodiversity, and of course, protecting our soil from erosion and salinity is a huge reason that we plant here in WA. So at Carbon Positive Australia, we concentrate for our planting on two areas, really. One is the southwest of Western Australia, and particularly the wheatbelt regions. So you'll see when I put some slides up of befores and afters, that's where we sort of concentrate on. But also over in New South Wales in the, what was the big scrub. And, you can see from that little map up in the top left-hand corner for me, maybe the right-hand corner for you, I'm not sure how it works on screens, but, what the cleared areas of land are. And we also know the importance of why those areas were cleared in terms of our agricultural heritage and all of those parts. But we know that there is the potential for planting trees and the impacts that can have on farm, and also for our climate as well. So we're encouraging and everyone to think about where there's room for trees on their farm, where there's the possibility of planting. And for us, we've narrowed that down to these two strategic locations, but as you can see from the map, they're pretty big. So the way that we've kind of approached it with people like Dr. Geoff Woodall is what types of planting we do and what the potential benefits are on farm for those plantings. And we've looked at trying to plant to address dryland salinity and using biodiverse and salt-tolerant native species. And we've actually had a reasonable amount of success with saltland planting. So it's not just been about planting, saltbush. It's been about putting in some pioneer species and, getting them to start to flourish. And I think, I'm going to show you a few sort of befores and afters, but there's been some pretty good success with the saltland planting that we've done. The others, and I know Dr. Woodall will talk a lot more about this, is biodiverse sandalwood planting. So,
hi.
Native.
How are you? Good. How are you?
Are we all good? So, the good thing about the sandalwood is obviously there is an income generation component to the sandalwood. What we've tried to do is to make the hosts a biodiverse range of hosts so that we bring that biodiversity back, as well as just, rather than just using an acacia jam and putting the sandalwood into that, we've actually looked at creating, I suppose, something a bit more. I mean, one of the projects that we've done, we've actually planted trees that can be used for native flowers. So, there could be an income in terms of the native flowers and then the biodiverse sandalwood at some point in the future. And then we've got our usual biodiverse carbon sites where obviously the income can come from creating accus if you're doing your own project, or working with us, which is always kind of good. We like people to come and work with us, where you're getting those trees planted on your land, monitored and taken care of for, over an extended period of time. So I'm going to rush on because we don't have a huge amount of time. So at Carbon Positive Australia, we try and develop and implement environmental restoration projects. We're not necessarily in the market for developing accus, although we do that as well. we're really looking at how we can restore healthy ecosystems and boost Australian conservation and restoration. What's also important for us is actually the research and monitoring element as well. So how the planting that we've actually done, what's that achieved, and what is the best way to get the good results. And that's why working with people like Dr Geoff Woodall is really helpful, because we can do some sort of experimentation, particularly in areas that are prone to drought, and provide demonstration sites that other parties can come and take a look at and see whether, you know, that might be something that they want to do on their property as well. A few sort of ideas about where we plant. Again, I won't spend a lot of time on that, but you can see those two cluster areas that I talked about earlier. Sorry, just having a moment. So every year we try and support a number of landholders to actually take part in the projects with us. We do this through funding through our donor network, who are businesses and also individuals, and we pay for the planting and the care of that planting into the future as well. So the landholder retains the full ownership of the land. However, because we want to protect the trees, we do ask that a landholder agreement is signed so that we know that the funding of those trees is permanent and they're not going to be cleared in the future. There are lots of reasons why you should be planting your land, I believe. Reducing salinity and waterlogging, obviously improving soil quality and reducing erosion, and, you know, providing windbreaks to protect crops and livestock. And of course, then, you know, restoring habitat for native flora and fauna, which obviously helps everybody overall. I think for us, we tend to look at sites that are generally greater than 30 hectares. However, if you've got a neighbour and you've sort of got 10 hectares each and maybe, you know, a bit of extra, we can work together with you as well. The land needs to have been cleared prior to 1990 as well, and have an annual rainfall of just over 200 millimetres. So I just want to give you some examples of some of the work. This was done with Threshold Environmental. This is down in Borden on Minang country. It was established in 2020. This was quite a small planting, because this was one of those examples where it was done with a neighbouring property. So they did 10 hectares, 17 species in total, and you can see the result just in the 3 years. And this is land that was particularly salt impacted. So it's really pleasing to see the results so far. Of course, you know, we've always got what's going to happen in the future, but I think, you know, good results so far. This is at Brookton on Bandong Noongar country, 29,000 seedlings and 33 hectares. This is a portion of that 33 hectares. So we've got a mixture of plantings happening here. It's a really good demonstration site, because we've got some sandalwood planting with biodiversity. We've got some saltland planting and also some general sort of environmental plantings, which is what you can see here. We've had some really good results at this property, and I think, you know, the landholder is really pleased with the results that, you know, he's getting there. This is out on very dry country, out of Warralakin, out towards sort of, as you're moving out towards Southern Cross. This was 60,000 seedlings. They went in last year, 185 hectares in total. We'll be planting more there next year. Again, this was planted with Dr. Geoff, so he can talk to you a little bit more about how we approach these sort of areas that really have a lot less rainfall already, and how that might then translate as climate conditions deteriorate into other farms that maybe aren't as drought affected at the moment, but might be in the future. So this is really future-proofing this work. I'm also showing you here, this is on Balladong Noongar country up at Ben Cubbin. This was probably one of the most trickiest sites I think we've ever done at Carbon Positive Australia. I'm showing you this because not everything goes to plan. We've been out and planted 7 times on this property. We don't give in easily, you know, we'll keep going. But, you know, we've got variable soil types, drought impacts and pests. So to get any result at all, I think we've done amazingly well. But, you know, I just want to say it doesn't always go to plan. You know, getting tree establishment is not always as easy as it looks. This is hard yards, the work that we do. It's down to the people on the ground and the skills and the techniques that they use to actually get these properties planted and up and running. And then we have some really great success stories. So this is at Cranbrook down on Minanga country, 65 hectares of biodiverse sandalwood and biodiverse carbon planting. So in 2020, it looked like this, and I can genuinely vouch that it did because I was down there actually planting on this one. And by 2023, it was starting to look like this. So not like your usual sort of carbon site, rows of trees, but you've got a much more natural landscape look to this particular planting. So it just goes to show what you can achieve even, you know, when you're planting for carbon outcomes. So part of our organisational imperative really is continuous measurement and research to improve outcomes. And we try and work with the best of the best in order to do that. So people like Dr. Geoff, people like Zoe Johnson down at Threshold, you know, who are wanting to experiment and wanting to do things that are a little bit different to try and see, you know, what's possible. And we build that knowledge and reporting in preparation for, you know, the biodiversity market that's upcoming, but also ensuring that we're getting third-party verification as well of the work that we do. So it's not just, you know, our thoughts on it, we're looking to get third-party verification as well. And as part of that, we provide reports and impact evaluation, which we're always happy to share both with the landholders and more generally as well as to how things have progressed. So I've got a little bit of a call to action. So if you've got your phones, please take it. We're asking people to sign a pledge to restore Australia's biodiversity hotspot because we're trying, as we all are, I think, in this industry, to get more funding in from government to make sure that when they pledge things like 30/30, that they're actually bringing money into our biodiversity hotspots and they're providing funding for this work to continue. So if you want to be part of that pledge and you know, for us to take that to Parliament and say, come on, guys, let's get some funding into these areas, please sign. Thank you. So I hope I didn't run over time, Casey, and I hope that was of interest to everybody. And yeah, always happy to answer questions as we get towards the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Louise. That was pretty much bang on. You're a complete expert at presenting, so thank you for that. And I also just wanted to say I appreciate your honesty, that, yeah, sometimes it doesn't go to plan and that you acknowledge that. So thank you for that. Mick, have you got any comments at this stage or should we move on?
Look, I think it's important that we appreciate the need to go back, not to plan to just do 1 year in planting and expect plantings to succeed. I think we can see the benefits that you've just shown, and we can plan better and explain the need to go back to our funders better so that they understand the importance of being persistent. I think that's probably my big message from there.
Great, thanks, Mick. I'm going to hand over to you, Geoff. You okay there? Just have to take yourself off mute as well. We can move on to Zoe if you need some time. There you are.
There we are. Sorry.
That's okay.
And I'm going to share that's what I'm going to share. Can you guys see that?
Yep, if you just want to switch it to presentation mode, that would be great.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thanks, Geoff.
Yeah, essentially, g'day and thanks for inviting me to have a few words. My talk's not quite as polished as Louise's, but I'll hopefully cover some useful information. It's sort of hard when you've been working in this space for a long time to know what to put in a little presentation like this, but I'll just sort of generally describe what I've been doing and what I am doing. Essentially, I help people with growing Australian native plants for various purposes, whether they be commercial purposes or for biodiversity, carbon plantings, forestry, forage sort of crops, so various salt bushes and other edible things for livestock production, and more recently for intensive honey production as well. And I thought this picture on this slide really summed it up. This is sort of why I do what I do for this little guy, the little thorny devil here. You know, you just never know what biodiversity benefits you're going to have. This little guy was in actually a monoculture planting, but you know, just shows you never know what's actually using some of these sites, and we don't have enough money to monitor every single site. Few points. My background is sort of in sort of practical R&D sort of area, all related to sort of native tree crops, and I've done a lot of work on Australian bush foods, West Australian sandalwood, and pretty much anything that I thought could make a dollar, as well as also provide some biodiversity benefits. Usually each year since the last 20 years or so, I usually put in about 100 to 300 hectares myself each year. And then I help other people sort of establish 50 to 5,000 hectares each year, every year for the last sort of 20 years. So so I'm not just doing research. I'm often actually in the paddock, and often I'm not really available at this time of the year. But thankfully it's been a bit of a dry start, so I've got time to do these sorts of things. And really, a lot of people that I try to help are those that have had a go and then had some failures. And then I try to come in and help them sort of work through why they've had failures and how they might do things a little bit differently. And Louise's site at Warralacken is a good example of that, which is a very, very dry site out near Southern Cross. And even in a very tricky year last year, we got a pretty good result out there. And if we take that sort of tricky problem-solving sort of approach to the northern wheat belt for last year, up around Kalbarri, where they had the driest year on record, we're still able to get at least some plants to survive and thrive in that environment. Whereas normally we would say with the driest year on record up there that you wouldn't get any result at all. So we've got at least a partial result up there. And then I also run a small little farm. That's a sandalwood farm. Had it for about 25 years. And what I'm going to talk to you a bit about is we've actually gone the full circle in this whole area. 25 years ago, we were talking about growing things for commercial gain, and maybe you might make some dollars out of it, as well as get some biodiversity benefits. These days, I'm actually helping people harvest, and they are getting a check in the mail, if that makes any sense. So they're actually, it's gone full circle. And it's a beautiful thing. You know, if you're a young person just starting out in this game, there's nothing more rewarding than harvesting a crop you put in 25 years ago. It's very, very rewarding. So if you need some something to get you motivated. And really my current, apart from running this small little farm, my current focus really is on the industrialization of restoration, I guess, and sort of upscaling native plant establishment. And I'm helping sort of everyone from your backyard florist who's got a half an acre to grow, things for floriculture, through to, really large scale plantings, post mining, carbon farming, those sorts of things. So it's a whole range of different scales and economics. And then this is a good example. This is just some timber trees planted 25 years ago. They weren't managed at all for saw log production, and so we've been harvesting them for chip biomass. So a very simple system, single species, but shows you, within that 25 years, going from, what you thought you were heading towards, which was a saw log, through to chipping it for a biomass product at the end of 25 years. So what you think you're going to do in 25 years is actually quite often different when you actually get to year 25. But at the end of the day, it's controlled the waterlogging, it's controlled the salinity on that site, and it's been profitable, which is fantastic. That's a good example there. And then, Louise was talking about some of my work on sandalwood. So I did a lot of work on growing sandalwood in biodiverse sort of systems and making those profitable. And this is a picture of myself with one of my sandalwood trees growing on my own property at Arthur River. You can see it's quite a large sandalwood tree. And if that sandalwood tree was in the Murchison region of WA, it would probably be well over 100 years old, but that's about 22 years old, that particular tree. So we can grow products and do some good biodiversity and conservation and get some good conservation outcomes. In this example, it links up, a large patch of remnant bush. It also buffers one of the last freshwater swamps on the Beaufort River plain, and is also growing some sandalwood as well. So that's another good example. But again, this is just about ready to be harvested. And in fact, in this next slide, you'll see here, this is some trial harvesting we did after a fire on the eastern side of the Stirling Ranges, and some other plantations biodiverse sandalwood plantations that I've set up are now being harvested as we speak. And from the sort of chatter that I get to hear back from, it's been very, very worthwhile and particularly economically viable. But then that leads on to the next lot of questions. What do we do with these sites after we've done a harvest? We've got all these lovely native plants growing up. After you've done a harvest, they come up randomly after that. So it starts to look more and more like the original bushland than it does a plantation. And that's another good example of something I think a lot of the younger people will need to understand, is that these systems are very long time duration. And even though you might have a row of trees at year 10 and year 20, once that's harvested and you have a fire, for example, go through, you lose any of those features that we would call a plantation, being things in rows and whatever else. You go back to these sites after they've been burnt, and it's just looks like any other fire scar through the bush. But definitely making some revenue and helping to pay for this sort of land use. This is some Australian brushwood that's being harvested that I planted on some salty land about 15 years ago. Now been all turned into brushwood fences around Western Australia. And the good thing is it's cultivated mature. It's not harvested from the wild. And that's with all of these native products. That's where you've got to go. You can't just keep raping and pillaging the bush. We need to grow them in plantation. So we've got control, and there's no uncertainty about how viable and how sustainable these industries are. You grow it on cleared agricultural land and you get a lovely product like this. And again, it's economically viable also. So that's brushwood. This is some of the work that I've been doing with some of the honey producers, getting them to grow some of our native leptospermum species and other species that accumulate dihydroxyacetone in their flowers, and then that's turned into essentially very similar to like Manuka honey in New Zealand. So that's another land use. You'll also see here in the background some of the more recent work that I'll talk about a bit later on, about sort of industrialization of planting and scaling up planting and reducing costs. All of those sort of things have an impact on economics, and that's what I've been sort of working on. But also, years ago, we did a lot of work using air seeders to sow Australian native plants through the North Stirlings region of WA and elsewhere. We've also used it to grow fodder crops as well for sheep and cattle. But they will always have limitations. But machinery is just one side of the equation. And then I come to this example here, where during COVID we couldn't get anyone we couldn't get a good planting team to go north of Kalbarri. So we are using here some Italian-made seedling planters, much more efficient. You need a lot fewer people. And in the height of the COVID sort of days, this allowed us to get a project done and implemented without the labour or a lot fewer people on site. And you can see here the first bit is scaling up and how modular this particular system was. They're straight off the shelf from Italy. Bit of trouble communicating sometimes when you don't speak Italian, but it did a great job, and you know, we're sort of moving forward with this sort of methodology. And you can see here we're planting 2 rows at a time here. The other thing here to note is that we're also trying to manage moisture in these very dry areas of Western Australia, using both chemical and physical water harvesting methodologies. And then I'll put this slide in just to show you the sort of scale that we're trying to work at. So it's big scale at lowest cost possible, essentially, is what I'm aiming to do. And what I'm hoping to do is do things cheaply so we can spend more money on some of the species that are very difficult to get back into these sort of sites. So rather than just be purely for saving money, it's about doing a better job with the amount of money that we have available. And this just shows you a really lovely result. This was, I can't remember, it's up out near, it's south of Southern Cross, out that way. And we got a good result in a fairly challenging year there, with a mix of seed and seedlings, so sown seed and planted seedlings. This shows you one of the machines that I have built. It's called my ComVeg seeder, which sort of scalps, rips, can mound and sow seed. And in this case, it's set up to plant seedlings as well, and generally travels about 5.5 kilometres an hour. And is putting out seed and seedlings. And again, it's very efficient and great for our sort of sandplain restoration that we do through WA. And then I guess the jewel in the crown really is what we would call Kongan restoration, the sandplain restoration. And this just gives you a good example. It's always lovely to go back to old sites, and I didn't want to bore all the people that are online with, you know, beautiful photos of old sites, because for a start, there's hundreds of them, and I haven't had a chance to go back to many of the sites that I've worked on. But this is a good example near Hopetown in WA. But it also highlights a couple of things that we've been doing with the sort of Kongan rehab, and that is that because the soil resources altered from what it was prior to clearing, we've got some issues associated with when you put back the original mix, it selects for some species over others. So we've got a much better system now to make sure we don't outcompete all the proteaceous plants, and get a better balance and better result in the end. And this just shows you some lovely bankshires and other hakeas growing nicely on that particular site. That was just a bit of cleared sand with cows running around it beforehand. And I guess I always have to put this up because I've built a lot of machines over the years. I think more recently, probably 6 or 7, and before that, probably 14 or so. A lot of them are retrofitted machines, so they're bits of ag machinery that I've retrofitted to do particular tasks, whether they be planting seedlings or sowing seed, or both. But really, so if you've only just woken up in my presentation, this next slide is the key one. Everyone loves machines and green tractors and red tractors and whatever else, but honestly, it's nothing to do with that. What it is about, it's about having a pathway, a decision support system to help you make good decisions about what to do with restoration. And it's no different than growing a wheat crop, a canola crop, or being a good sheep farmer, or just doing a good job with whatever your job is. You need to have some sort of pathway, some decision support systems, and know what's really important and what's not that important, and then focusing on those areas to ensure success. So, you know, in the early days, we often sort of said, oh, it's too dry, too wet. That's why our sites didn't work. these days I tend to use a lot of look at the site, look at the hydrology of the site, the biology, climate, whatever, and then use some sort of system to work out prescription for the site. Then we do all the usual sort of preparation sort of things, depending on what we've seen when we do site assessment. That could be things like looking at soil moisture and how we're going to, what's our soil moisture conservation strategy, how we're going to deal with a dry season. And then we do the establishment, and then we try to maximise persistence and vigour of the plants. And then hopefully we end up with successful rehabilitation. But what you don't see in this photo is any particular reference to a particular machine or a particular tractor or, you know, some magical, you know, treatment for a seed. It's about putting together a whole package and also fitting into what your aims are. You know, everyone's got different aims, and we don't always have to have the same aims that somebody else down the road has. So it's important to set this whole framework up. And then ultimately you do have some failures, but by doing this sort of methodology, you tend to increase your chances of having a good result. And I think, I'm not too sure how I'm going for time there, but if I'm getting close to time, then I'll call it quits there and take some questions.
We might leave it there, Geoff. As awesome as this presentation is, I am conscious of time. That was awesome. You don't do yourself enough justice there. There was some fantastic examples of the work that you can do. And this is not my world, but I saw that you were talking a lot about a big roadblock for farmers is that loss of product, or the potential loss of production of land. And so I really love how you're trying to counteract that argument by saying you can plant and have some financial success as well as contribute to conservation outcomes. So thank you so much for that. All right, Bonnie is going to present on behalf of Zoe. So it's a bit of a tag team here. Zoe, do you want to show your video first or your slides?
Firstly, I'll unmute myself.
Yep.
I just wonder, it's quite a long video. It's about 4 minutes, and I'm wondering whether most people have seen it anyway. But yeah, so I'm open to.
I think it's fine. I think we've got time to see it, and I love it. Okay. It's a great video. So let's show
Thanks to DEWA, they did a good job. Yeah, perhaps start there, and then I'll just wrap it up okay, with a few before and after pictures and some description about how I went about it, the support I had, and the challenges.
That sounds great. Thanks, Bonnie.
I'm Zoe Johnson, and I'm here in the Ferguson Valley in the area called Henty. And I've been here for coming up to 3 years. When I came here, this was an old dairy farm, and the cows were allowed to roam because the only access that they had was at the dam just next to the creek. And it was really dry, very hard. You know, I mean, it's got a gravel loam base. There wasn't any water flowing at all, no vegetation. Because, as I say, the cows had been allowed to go through, so there was a lot of kikuyu, but that had been all chewed down and grazed, and a lot of what they say pogging through the creek beds, just a little local creek, but it does flow down into the Leschenault catchment and into the Leschenault estuary. In summer it pretty much dries up mostly, although since we've done some work and put some plants in and made a lot of effort to slow the water down, there are some pools that are staying through the year now, which is good. So we call it the Winter Creek, but it's actually, you know, got water in it all year round. Getting the plants in, ironically, even though that's hard work, is possibly the easiest part of the process. And it's really, you know, it has a really good feel-good factor. I had some help. through the local catchment council, National Catchment Council, and the Aboriginal Workabout Crew, Danju. And they used augers to get it in, which I highly recommend. Then watering the plants throughout the first summer, we used a fire truck and a hose and pumped water from the dam. So we were hand watering, close to 2,000 plants. And then weed control, because this area has got quite a lot of seed bank in it. We sprayed once, but we were reluctant to use too many chemicals, so weed control then has become quite a manual thing, which is slashing and whippersnipping, and that's pretty labour intensive. Hopefully, now that the plants themselves have established and they're bigger than the weeds, we'll have to focus less on that. So to wander through and see the diversity of the plants, all from this area, so they're native, and to see them establishing themselves. They're still competing with weeds, but they're holding their ground and they're making their own, and this is now a green belt, and it makes me feel really proud. Actually, I feel really good. I've just been really heartened by how quickly the plants have found water and established themselves. So we watered them for the first summer, and everyone kept saying, if you get them through the first summer, you're going to be okay. And we have, so we're coming up to our second summer now. And, some of them are taller than me. There are red-tailed black cockatoos, there are carnabis, there are frogs. I think the cows would love to be in here if I let them. The trouble with cows is they don't just go and pick out the kikuyu, they all also chew down every native plant that I put in and put over every stake and tree guard, so you can't let them in, sadly, as much as I would love to give them the feed. This was something that, from me personally, I wanted to do anyway, but then to discover that there was funding available, and that it was quite practical funding as well, and that it involved fencing and expertise, and that there were people that could really help with some of the advice and guidance. It wasn't just about the money, it was about, as I say, that support and that teamwork, and a little bit more strategy. It wasn't just me trotting along the creek shoving plants in. There was a lot more thought to it, and that was because I had met the Catchment Council and had become part of the HEWA program. I would never have been able to achieve what's been done in such a short space of time on my own, and there are people that want to come and help, so grab that support if you can. That would be my biggest recommendation. I have a lot of optimism that in 5 to 10 years' time, that rather than being that desolate, hard, inhospitable landscape that it was when I bought the property, that hopefully there'll be pockets of shade and more habitat. And so I'm really excited about looking at it over the next 5 to 10 years. And it feels very valuable and like a legacy, really. Yeah.
Okay, yes. So can you hear me? Yep. Thank you to the Department of Environment and Environmental Resource for doing that, and also to the National Catchment Council. Oh, something's happening. I think we've gone on.
A forest garden is a design to
music. Okay. Okay. Right, so then I just put together a few little slides. So yes, as you heard, a lot of it was covered in the video. So that's the aerial view there was part of the process that you go through with the Healthy Estuaries and the National Catchment Council to map out the area, and the specific focus for the Catchment Council in particular, and Healthy Estuaries, of course, is about the water. And I was eligible to apply for this grant because there is a small bit of water. I mean, I think it's less than 500 metres long, but there is a part of a creek that runs through from one fence line to the other under the road and then continues on. So the emphasis really for this type of revegetation is to be around waterways and, notice things like the frogs and the species and habitat that's around specifically waterways. So it's a dry, it has been cleared, the farm, but we've chosen the most, the easiest place really to plant plants in some respects, but the rationale for that is to help improve the waterways overall. Across the road, so this area is down in Ferguson Valley and was mined by Dorrell for rare earths up until about 2014, and then they did some restorative works that finished around 2018. So across the road, the property that I'm the landholder of wasn't mined, but everywhere around the boundaries was. And across the road was a site that had been rehabilitated about 8 to 10 years prior. And I found that actually quite inspiring, because it was very much a real example of, you know, what can happen in 5 to 10 years time. And I then, you know, had even more impetus to kind of join on to that corridor, because it goes under the road and then through. So it was good to have that example across the road. If we just go on to the next slide, again, I think it's a bit more of the before. So, you know, happy cows kind of wandering all the way down to the front of the property to get water. So one of the first things to do was to provide water in troughs to each of the paddocks. That had been done when it was a dairy, but all that infrastructure had, by the time I got there, you know, 30 years later, that it all, you know, was derelict and not useful anymore. So we redid the water troughs and fenced it off. So that's there's just a couple more slides that show the before, and if we just go to the next one, yeah, so that's it. So that was, summer was the first one. Now we're into winter, and you can just sort of see where all the hooves have made those divots in the water there, and it really just stops it flowing or being very useful in the landscape in many ways. I just might get the slideshow up on me so I know what I'm going to be talking about next. Yeah, so then the next one, yeah, another impact of there being no vegetation in the waterway is that the erosion and the speed, that because I'm at the bottom of the hill, the speed of which the water would come down would carry all the debris from further up, destroy fences. That road that you can see there on the right hand side has had to be rebuilt by the local Dardanup Shire guys several times, being washed out and that sort of stuff. That didn't happen. I mean, that didn't happen last winter or the winter before, not just because we'd done some revegetation, but also, as everyone knows, there's a lot less water happening, and we're still crossing our fingers and everything for more this season. But yeah, so, but part of the benefit of putting in these sorts of things, the plants, some fallen trees, logs, rocks, all that sort of stuff, was to keep the water in the system longer. The next slide, I think, is the support. Oh no, more cows. Sorry, we can skip over that one. That gives you more of an idea of what it did look like. This is the support, and this has been a fantastic and really heartwarming association with the Leschenault Catchment Council that have a great relationship with the Danju, which means working together, and that's exactly what we do. So as part of the HEWA agreement, there's some funding, there's some in-kind support, and this group, the Danju, came and planted and also helped put up fences and that sort of stuff. It was a really lovely experience to share, actually, together, and really, you know, as well as working side by side, just sharing in-jokes and cultural exchanges as well. So that's a really lovely arrangement that the Leschenault Catchment Council and relationship that's developing down in that area. The next one is, yeah, just a bit of a you know, feel good picture at sunset when you actually look back and see all the work that's done. Just a note on weeds and kikuyu, because clearly it's green in some respects for all the wrong reasons, and some parts are brown. Scott Bartholomew, who's on from the Leschenault Biosecurity Group, assists with spraying and preparing the ground for planting. Kikuyu, and it's just a huge challenge, and it's quite a bit to get your head around as to, you know, how, especially near waterways and that sort of stuff. So we did one round of spraying, but it's still really hard to control. That's one of the biggest challenges, I think, especially in old agricultural areas, the Kikuyu. We can touch on that a bit later. The next slide, I think. So these, in terms of the plants and the diversity, my other hat, as well as being on the board of the National Catchment Council, is and a landholder, is that I am at a PACE nursery in North Fremantle, and a PACE specialises in plants from the Swan Coastal Plain and Darling Scarp. But I've been there about 3 years, and I didn't know a lot about native plants, but it hasn't been a steep learning curve. It's been straight up in all of this. And I've been learning from a lot of people, but fortunately I'm hugely interested in it, so that makes the learning fun. So it was Boyne Botanical Nursery. It was what was then SWIC, which has now changed its name. And it'll come to me. It was people from the National Catchment Council. It was a PACE. I kind of drew on all that knowledge and came up with a list of around 30 species that were, you know, and then we looked at the land, which species didn't mind wet feet in the ephemeral zones, which I, you know, wouldn't have known 5 years ago, and all those sorts of things. And this gives you a small handful of some of those. So there's, I think this is Pattersonia occidentalis, and then, you know, I can list them off for you. But basically, a range of plants, the far right one being the flooded gum, which has been very happy. And I think if we go to a next slide, sorry if I'm rushing through all of this. Just before we go on to the flooded gums and how big they are now, as I mentioned in the video, the water has actually pooled and stayed now, and as a result, this native lily has returned and is flourishing and doing really well in a tiny little pool of water. And that's something that I have found really heartening and really surprising, is no matter how degraded, I should say, the land has been, or how much Kikuyu there is there, the optimism the plants seem to have is quite contagious. They just they grew faster than I thought. They've established quicker, and then some things have returned that you know, we didn't even envisage. So that's been really lovely to see as well.
Zoe, I might need to call it there. I feel like that's a really good place to leave the conversation, if that's okay. I'm just conscious. I just want to make sure that we're leaving some space for questions. Thank you so much for that. It's such an inspiring.
That's my last slide, and that's how tall they are now. So that's perfect.
Oh, amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Sorry to.
No worries.
Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. Mick, do you mind if you just field some questions for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone wants to put their hand up in the chat for the reaction, please do, and we'll unmute you. While we're waiting for that, I just want to reflect on that last comment you made, Zoe. The optimism the plants seem to have is, I wrote courageous. I wasn't sure if it was courageous or contagious, but
contagious.
Both. Contagious. Like, that's a beautiful way of looking at it. I know we have got a question in the chat, and that comes from Amy, PHCC. Hi, Amy. Thank you, Geoff. Any tips on improving soil biology on a large scale? Also, species selection. Any thoughts on including non-local species better adapted to drying conditions? Do you have any thoughts on that, Geoff?
Yep. Yeah. In terms of improving soil biology at scale before you do a reveg project, probably the most useful technique I have found is, and if you've got time on your side, which often a lot of projects don't, And that is simply to leave it for quite a few years until things like, particularly if it's clay-based, allowing the native grasses to sort of take over for a while. And then once you've got that cover on there, then the whole system changes a lot, and then working with that system to then introduce your other plants. But unfortunately, that takes a good 4 to 5 years before that happens in most of the agricultural parts of WA. So that sort of limits you a bit, but that's probably the best at scale methodology I've used. Sorry, and what was the second part to that question?
The second part was suggestions on any non-native climate variable, or sorry, non-local species better adapted to drying conditions.
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of, introduced plants that people can grow on farms for various reasons and to, achieve some of the goals that you might want, for timber production or flower production or water use or looking after salt or whatever. But I guess my comment on that is that I can't exactly remember how many species we've got in the state. I think in the southwest, I think it's a few thousand species, 5,000 or whatever.
Yeah.
We do have a lot of species to choose from. It's not like we're in the UK where you've only got a few hundred to choose from. We've got thousands and thousands of species. And so I think you can always find a native equivalent to any introduced sort of species, if that makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Geoff. Just a quick slide that's up still on the screen. Just WA just asked us to show this, that there is some funding and support available through the Healthy Estuaries WA program. I will send out a link after that you can look at and see whether that program might work for you as well. If you just want to stop sharing there, Bonnie, that would be great. Any hands up? Does anyone want to ask any specific questions at this time? Zoe.
I wanted to ask Geoff the balance of dry seeding versus seedlings.
Yeah, probably depends on the site, really, Zoe. I mean, some sites. I mean, I tend to work out the relative mix depending on what the person's aims are. So what it is you're trying to achieve. For example, if you're trying to do it's like a carbon project, for example, and you have to have, say 25% vegetation cover, then you've got to make sure you achieve that goal. Otherwise, you're never going to, what you're able to claim from a carbon sort of model is going to be compromised. So it depends a lot on your aim, and each sort of product or, service or biodiversity, whatever it is going to impact on the relative amount of seed and seedlings. And then, of course, you've got your site things, and you had some great things in your talk about, weeds and things like that. So when you're thinking about using seed versus seedlings, you need to consider that, if you've got kikuyu and a highly modified system with fertilizer inputs coming down the creek, in your example, probably once or twice a year, then you need to use seed sort of carefully and think about alternative sort of approaches to it. So I think it sort of depends a bit on I don't have a number. It sort of depends on the situation, I guess, is the answer. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Geoff. Any other questions at this time? I know that Shane had to leave, unfortunately, and he did have a specific question for Geoff, so I'll get that answered offline for Shane. Anybody else?
Casey, I might just add that I've dropped a link to the Healthy Estuaries Program's stock exclusion and reveg program in our chat, but I presume we'll add that to the wrap-up email that we send out.
Yeah, we definitely will, but thanks for doing that, Mick. I appreciate that. I am a real stickler for time, and I do need to do school pickup as well. So I might just leave it there if there aren't any other burning questions or comments. No? Okay, fantastic. Okay, so we're gonna include a heap of links and resources, including a really handy tick box of what you need to do when you're prepping your site, getting ready for planting from Carbon Positive. So that's a fantastic resource that they've developed just for this presentation. So thank you to our presenters. Everyone was fantastic. I hope you all got as much out of it as I did. In the email that I send out in a couple of days, I will send a link to WA Landcare membership opportunities, because there are so many people that registered that aren't members, and we would love to see more of our farming community in our member base, as farmers are the origin story of landcare in Western Australia, and we would love to have more of your voices as part of our collective voice for landcare in WA. We'll also be sending out a short survey that will give you the opportunity to provide us with some feedback on today's session and whether you'd like to see more on this topic, because it was very well received in terms of registrations, and I feel like there might be a bit more to this conversation that needs to happen. So our next Landcare Checks In will be on Tuesday the 14th of May, and we'll be chatting to our coastal community about coastal restoration this time and asking what's working and what's not. And we're also in the development stages of June's Landcare Checks In, which will be focused on unpacking the Future Drought Fund and the opportunities that lie within that program, and exploring some projects and case studies in WA that have utilised that funding, which might be of interest to our farming community online today. So thank you so much to everyone for joining, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mick.